Hello, I'm Marianne Mashiri and this is the Iran War Today, our BBC News briefing bringing you up to date with all you need to know from the last 24 hours in the US war with Iran. Well, let's start with some of today's key developments now. Iran warns the Strait of Hormuz will remain closed until the US meets its demands, but Donald Trump says he wants conflict compensation from Iran. Oil prices rise as an agreement between the US and Iran on the Strait of Hormuz looks increasingly unlikely again. Iran chooses Mohsen Rezaei to be the new security chief alongside 6 new appointments to the Revolutionary Guards and the armed forces. Well, the conditions to open the Strait of Hormuz haven't been met. That's according to the Iranians. One of the things they wanted was for the US to provide compensation. More on that shortly. But that request has prompted the US president to post on social media. He said, "I am likewise demanding compensation from Iran for all of the people that they have killed and gravely wounded." Well, this latest reaction from the US president comes after Iran said talks with Oman on new shipping lanes are almost complete, but said the opening of the Strait of Hormuz would still be subject to certain conditions. Well, let's remind you of what the foreign minister said.
Our negotiations with Oman are regarding the determination of a new maritime route in the Strait. These negotiations have progressed well. I can say they are in the final stages, and the old existing routes will be replaced with new ones. Specialists are currently working on the maps. Of course, this does not mean the opening of the Strait. This agreement may take place, but the opening is contingent upon the fulfillment of a set of other conditions, which have, in any case, been conveyed through intermediaries.
Well, that was the foreign minister there. Although he didn't reiterate those conditions, last week the regime did say they include a number of things: an end to US threats against Iran and hostilities against Iran's regional allies, lifting the naval blockade that's currently in place on boats entering and exiting Iranian ports, and withdrawing US naval and air forces from near Iran, as well as payment of war damages and indeed the removal of sanctions. On top of that, the unconditional release of Iran's frozen assets. Well, it doesn't appear to be something the US president is considering, especially since he posted online that the US wants compensation. In an interview with Axios, Donald Trump said his administration is watching economic pressure mount on Iran. He said, "We are low-keying it. We are only semi-negotiating with them. We're just watching Iran with its huge inflation and the fact they have no money. It will work out. It always works out. It's like a chess game." Well, those comments didn't go unnoticed by the Iranian regime. The foreign ministry spokesman said, "Lights out or lights on, Iranians showed they are professional chess players." Well, joining me now is our North America correspondent, Daniel Bush, and our Middle East correspondent, John Donison. Daniel, to you first. Remind us what Donald Trump said exactly in that interview.
Well, he seemed to suggest that he may ratchet back military pressure on Iran, that they are semi-negotiating in the president's words. This comes after multiple times in recent weeks where President Trump has threatened to do the exact opposite, to ratchet up military pressure, to increase the war. At one point recently saying that he had held off on an attack that would have been the biggest since World War II in the history of the world. So this was an effort by the president apparently to at least sort of lower that temperature a little bit and suggest that, hey, the U.S. can wait Iran out. Of course, that is a gamble here in the United States where there's a midterm election coming up just around the corner in a couple of months. And there's mounting pressure on President Trump to move quickly to end this war, to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, to lower the price of oil and more. And so the president's suggesting over the weekend that he may not be in a hurry. Well, he may not be, but his party certainly is here in the United States.
So the prospect of a peace deal then, Daniel, in terms of the US president?
Well, it's about as far off as it has been for several weeks. It's been a little bit of a holding pattern, but just in that Truth Social that you posted a moment ago, where President Trump introduced a new demand on Iran in response to the Iranian suggestion of compensation claims, President Trump saying there that he now wants compensation for Iran for decades of what he says has been violence from the regime. That is not likely to be something that Iran would agree to. President Trump also pointing out that he would want compensation for the victims who were killed in mass protests there earlier this year. Again, not something that Iran would presumably be interested in entertaining. So it's the latest example of just when there seemed to maybe potentially be breakthrough in diplomatic talks, President Trump introduces more wrinkles into it. And when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz, still pretty far off from a deal, at least one the United States would seemingly be willing to accept.
Daniel, thank you. Well, let's cross back to our Middle East correspondent, John Donison, who is in Jerusalem. And John, do you feel that we're a stalemate in the Strait of Hormuz? What's the feeling in Israel on that?
I think that's a pretty fair assessment. The Strait of Hormuz hasn't reopened in any meaningful way, despite numerous pledges from President Trump that it would happen soon and encouraging words that progress was being made. I don't think there's any appetite from either the Americans or the Iranians to resume full-scale war, but the carrot of diplomacy from the United States hasn't worked, and the stick of military action hasn't worked either. So, yeah, we are in a bit of a holding pattern, and I think the fact that the price of oil is going up again reflects that.
Let's talk a little bit about one of Iran's conditions, John, because one of those conditions is an end to hostilities against regional allies. But is Israel likely to ever agree to that?
No, I don't think it is. And it's important to remember that we have three unresolved wars in this region. We have the war between the United States, Israel and Iran. We also have the war in Gaza, which that is still rumbling on at a lower level, and also the war in Lebanon between Israel and Hezbollah. And particularly with regards to the conflict in Lebanon, Iran has insisted that that must be part of a broader peace deal. They want Israeli forces to withdraw from southern Lebanon, where they continue to occupy a large part of the country. And although there has been a dialing down of violence in southern Lebanon, while Israeli troops remain there, Hezbollah, Iran's ally, obviously not happy with that. There is the possibility of violence flaring up. And there is an appetite in Israel for that war to resume, with elections coming up here in Israel too. And similarly, with Gaza, there is an appetite to continue the fight against Hamas, another ally of Iran. So, no, I don't think there is any likelihood that Israel is going to say it is prepared to stop its aggression, as Iran would see it, against the likes of Hamas and Hezbollah.
OK. John, thank you very much. Daniel, thank you to you too. Well, investors are digesting the latest developments and what they mean for the markets and indeed for those oil prices. Well, let's cross live and speak to our business correspondent, Samira Hussain. Samira, what have oil prices and indeed markets been doing today?
Well, look, oil prices are again under a lot of pressure. As I came in, the last check, we saw that Brent crude was trading at around $87 a barrel. You'll remember that last week, on the hopes that there could be some sort of deal to reopen the strait, we saw that the price of oil was trading at about $80. So clearly, from an investor point of view, that oil price is climbing because, as John pointed out, that stalemate continues, and there doesn't seem to be any indication that there's going to be any let-up or any cessation of the violence or coming together for any kind of an agreement. And that means that the crucial shipping way, the Strait of Hormuz, remains closed to so much shipping. And remember that a fifth of the world's energy supplies, namely oil, passes through that strait. What's making this even more complicated is when you look at the global oil reserves, that had really blunted some of the early impact of the war. Those reserves are now at critical levels. And so we could be emerging quite soon into an energy emergency because the strait remains closed.
Samira, thank you. Well, inside Iran, they've appointed a new leader of the National Security Council. Mohsen Rezaei is a former commander of the Revolutionary Guard. He'll now have a key role in deciding how Iran pursues the conflict with the US and Israel. As well as this, Iran has made 6 new appointments to the Revolutionary Guards and the armed forces. Well, to help us understand what all this means, I'm joined by Bahram Abbasi from BBC Persian. Bahram, who is this new security leader and how important is this appointment?
So he was the commander of the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, for 16 years, including during the war between Iran and Iraq back in the 1980s, which lasted about 8 years. So he was at the center of the most consequential decisions in the history of the Islamic Republic. He wrote a letter to the former Supreme Leader Ruhollah Khomeini about the end of the war, saying that if Iran wanted to continue fighting against Iraq, it needed a lot of resources, military and financial resources, which was described as shocking by the then Supreme Leader. And shortly after, Iran accepted a ceasefire deal with Iraq. His appointment to the Supreme National Security Council is significant because this body is one of the most important decision-making bodies in the Islamic Republic when it comes to making decisions about the war, of course, but also foreign policy, national security. We don't know why his predecessor was ousted, because Mohammad Baqir Zolqadr was appointed only in March. So I think it's too early to say whether Mohsen Rezaei's appointment would signify a fundamental change to Iran's strategy towards the war. But it definitely is a significant change in terms of the people who are sitting at the table and making those decisions.
And there have been more appointments to the Revolutionary Guards, the armed forces. What do all these appointments tell us about the direction in which Iran is going?
So it seems that Mojtaba Khamenei is trying to put his own stamp on the security and political establishment. These people who've been appointed today, they are not new faces. They've been in the security and military apparatus for decades. But he's trying to show that he's in control, he's in charge. One of the interesting appointments is the appointment of one of his key allies, Hossein Taeb, to the head of Basij paramilitary force that is in charge of one of its main role has been the crackdown on anti-government protests inside of Iran. He was ousted under Mojtaba's father, the previous supreme leader. The fact that he's been brought back into the fold shows that Mojtaba Khamenei is trying to reassert his control. He's been absent from the public eye since the start of the war, which killed his father and reportedly left him injured. There have been questions about who is really making the decisions.
Whether he's even alive or not.
Exactly.
There are questions about that, right?
He hasn't been seen. There hasn't been any videos or audio of him. So it seems that he's trying to send this message that he's in charge, he's in control, and he's making the decisions.
Okay, Bahram, good to talk to you. Thank you very much. Well, whether you're joining us on YouTube, TikTok, Sounds, radio or TV, thank you for your time. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow with the Iran War Today.